Okay, now if you take a look at what I have on my desk here, here are two very good examples of baitcasting reels that are my favorites. On your left here is a Shimano Coriolis, and on the right here is a Garcia Ambassadeur 5500 C3. Now, the difference between these two, aside from physical differences, is this is a magnetically controlled casting reel. This is a centrifugal brake casting reel. The centrifugal brakes were the earlier, more original design of the baitcasting reels. In the 1980s, Shimano and Daiwa, it's debatable about who did it first, applied magnetic braking designs to the reels to slow the spool down during the cast. Now, the baitcasting reels you see on the top, the spool here rotates during the cast. So as you cast, the line is actually paid out, the spool rotates around, and the line comes through the level winder up here in the front. And notice in these two different designs, the reels, the Shimano is kind of covered in small, round. In the Ambassador, it's sort of a wire U-shaped thing. Okay, they both serve the same purpose. What the level winder does in each reel is as you wind the spool, the level winder moves back and forth in a reciprocating fashion, and what that does is it pays the line out evenly on the spool. Now that's very important because the line has to be laid out evenly to cast properly. And if it's not on there tight, it will also lead to backlash. So when you fish with a bait casting reel, you have to make sure constantly that the line is tightly wound on the reel. Now, normal resistance of the lure going through the water will aid that, but sometimes you have to put your hand up here and actually grab the line and squeeze it a little bit, and as it winds, put pressure on it so that it does wind correctly. It's also very important, if you notice inside the spool here, there's a line. You'll see it right there. That indicates how far you fill the spool up with line. And it doesn't matter what kind of line. This one has monofilament. The Ambassador over here has a braided line in there. They both serve the same basic function. They're going to connect your lure to the rod and reel and to the fish eventually. The line has to be paid out evenly on each spool with each kind of design. Fluorocarbon, same thing. It's more like monofilament, but again, it has to be spooled evenly. But it's very important that you fill only to this line and not above it. If you fill above, what will happen is when you cast, the reel will backlash. The line will be too loosely wound on here, and it will cobweb and balloon off and head for the first guide. And that's where you get your backlashes most often. Now, if you correctly apply your casting technique, it's not even necessary to apply the brakes too much if the reel is filled properly. Now, if you look on the side of the Shimano, you'll see the magnetic casting control is here. And it's set kind of midway up here. I think it's on about 5, 6, or 7. And what it does is it causes the magnetic brakes inside here to influence force on a flange that comes out of the side of the spool. So as you cast, it slows down the spool rotation, and that leads to the line going out at the same speed that the lure is traveling. When the lure gets ahead of the line, that causes the backlash, okay? Casting straight into the wind will do that. So as the lure goes out and the wind stops it, the spool keeps turning and you get the backlash effect. If you ever want to see a backlash aside from a bait casting reel, go to your toilet, grab the toilet paper roll and jerk it real hard. You'll get a backlash right away. And Jimmy Houston says when he goes to the bathroom in the morning, he backlashes the toilet paper, he probably shouldn't go bass fishing. But that's Jimmy. Okay, so back to reel design. Magnetic casting control in the Shimano here. You have centrifugal casting control in the Ambassador here. Inside this reel, if you went in here, there's a braking flange, almost like the drum brakes that they used to use on cars. Now that, disc brakes have replaced that mostly. On here, on the spool arbor, are two little shafts that stick out, and you'll have brakes on either side. And centrifugal force, as the reel turns and the spool turns when you cast, cause these two little brakes to move out and push against the flange, and that slows the spool down during the cast. It does the same function as the magnetic control does in the Shimano, as you have in the Garcia Ambassador. No difference. Now, if you want to liken it to similarities and differences in design, this is more like automatic transmission. This is more like manual transmission. This can be adjusted for the cast by the magnetic force on the side here. This cannot really, okay? One thing that you also have to set on these reels when you do it each time for each lure is there's a brake on the side here. See it on the Shimano. Garcia, also here is a brake. What happens is the spool has a shaft and there are ends that stick out on it. And there are brass plates inside here and inside the bearing surface on the other side. When you tighten this down, it puts pressure on the end of the spool. And what you want to do when you set your bait casting reel before you cast is to adjust this brake so that the lure, when the free spool is engaged, here on the Shimano, here on the Ambassador, it's irrelevant which type, the lure will slowly pay out towards the ground or towards the water. So when you push the button, it's got to go down slowly. You adjust this control, or here on the Ambassador, so that the lure, when it's in free spool, goes down slowly. Now, unless you're using the exact same size weight, every time you change lures, you have to adjust that brake. A lot of people have trouble with bait casting reels because they don't make that initial adjustment, and they also don't make the adjustment when they change the lure. So it's very important to do that. Okay? Each time you change lure weight, adjust this brake. That is independent of, like on the magnetic cast control, like the Shimano, here, which you adjust simply for spool control during the cast. And the way these work is less gives you less magnetic force, more gives you more. And you can actually crank this thing up to 10 on most reels, and it's almost impossible to backlash. You don't have that luxury on the Ambassador. This has no cast control on the side, you'll notice. There are mechanical brakes inside here, and they operate the same every time. You can't adjust them while the reel is going. Okay? And you also notice, too, in reel design, that the Shimano has a lower, more ergonomic profile. And what it's meant to do is to fit to the hand, and you basically palm around the reel as you use it. The Ambassador is rounder, but they've actually made this newer C3 5500 more ergonomic, and they put a plate up here where your thumb can rest while you're palming the reel. It's very important, and I'll show you in a casting demonstration in a couple of days, that you palm the reel when you're reeling it in, and actually put your hand around here so that your strength and your control are close to the reel, and you'll get the best feel, because feel is very important in bass fishing. Most lures, especially like plastic worms and soft plastics, have to be fished along the bottom, and you have to be able to feel the bait going as you're pulling along the bottom. Okay? So that's some of the basic differences between the two types of casting reels. Both are fine. I actually cast a little bit farther as a rule with the centrifugal reels. I like the Ambassadors. They have a wider spool design for the 5500 series, and I always preferred that when I got it in Virginia on Smith Mountain Lake for striped bass. These reels are far more substantial. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Shimano, but the metal frame on the Ambassadors are a little bit tougher, and striped bass, in case you've never hooked one, are a freight train. They're extremely powerful. They can actually bend and torque the reel frame and bind it and cause you to lose the fish, where the spool will actually rest against the reel housing and bind, and the line will snap and you'll lose the fish. Okay?